what to do, and what to avoid. So I'm going to go through the brief outline of how you put together a pitch, and this is a pitch for lots of different things, but it will help you with that additional extra assignment, weekly one, that if you want to take part, you can, which is sending a pitch to me for the featured article of the week. So, but this is absolutely how to write a pitch for lots of different things. You'll also see in the first week's videos to watch, there are a couple of other people telling you exactly how to write pitches. Have a look at them as well, because they're saying very much the same sorts of things that I am, and hopefully that will sort of reinforce things. Okay. So, why do you need a pitch? Well, there are lots of different reasons why you might need a pitch. It might be that you want to get a job and actually you've got to pitch for it in some way or other. It could be starting a business, in which case you need to pitch to a bank in order to get a bank loan, to explain why you are the best person to start this business, why you're the best person to have this particular job. Or it could be simply straightforwardly for this module that you're actually pitching to write a particular article. And that's very much what we're going to be focusing on. But do remember that being able to write a good pitch is something that you can use in lots of different ways. So when you've written a pitch, or when you're about to write a pitch, do you write the article first? Or do you sort out the contract? Do you get the contract first? And the simple answer here is you get the contract first. So that means when you're pitching for an article to me, you have not written the article yet. If you're pitching for an article that you'd like to write for any publication out there in the world, so whether it's a piece that you'd like to write for Independent Voices, which is part of the independent newspaper, or whether you'd like to write a piece for the Times Higher Education Supplement, or for Gama Sutra, or Rock Paper Shotgun, or for Cosmopolitan, or for Teen Vogue, or wherever, you pitch the idea first. You don't write the article, you instead have an idea of what the article would be about, but you have not written it. Why do you do that? Well, because you want to organise and agree with the editor exactly what they want in that article. So you pitch an outline, an idea, and often the editor will come back to you and say, that sounds great, but could you make sure you include this? Or we don't need to have that element because we had an article about that last week. Could you make sure that you flag up this instead? So it's very much a process of negotiation. And often, ideally, you will also negotiate at that point how much you're going to get paid for it, because that's what you're really aiming at, is getting paid for the piece. And yes, of course, there are occasions where you won't get paid. You won't get paid for writing in the media, for example, because it's part of a course that you're doing. But also there may be occasions when you are quite happy to put something out there in the public domain for maybe a new startup magazine or a new publication, and perhaps you're quite happy to actually just get your work out there, and that is quite valid to do that. But ideally you want to be paid for it. So this is also the option or the opportunity for you to say, well, what's your current going rate? And if you're worried about what you should ask for, have a look on journalism.co.uk and they will tell you what the current going rates are for freelancers. Or just do a quick Google search, what is the current freelance rate for an article. And there are quite a few Facebook groups as well for freelancers that will tell you and give you an idea, and you can join them, and they'll make suggestions about what you should be looking for, how much you should expect to charge or to receive. So do have a look there. There is nothing stopping any of you from becoming a freelance writer today. You do not have to have a degree in writing or a degree in anything to become a freelance writer. You do not have to have the journalism qualification from the National Council of Training for Journalists. You don't need to have that NCTJ diploma. You don't need it. I don't have one. I was a columnist for a national magazine for a number of years. I've been a magazine editor. I still do a bit of freelancing now and then. You do not have to have any specific qualifications to do that. I do happen to have a master's in creative writing, but you don't have to have that to put articles out there. That is not necessary. Nobody will be asking you what your qualifications in writing are. They might want to know why you're the best person to write this, but that does not have to be linked to qualifications. So you don't write the article first, you sort out the pitch, and you get your pitch accepted first. So how do you write a pitch? Well, you should have an idea, a big idea, and something that should be timely. So it should be something that people want to read about now, that is connected to something that is happening at the moment. Because if it's not connected to something that's going on now, then it could be that, say, for example, you've got an idea for writing an article about Christmas. That's not going to be timely right now. Now, that's not to say that you can't pitch for an article about Christmas, but I would recommend that you pitch that during the summer to some of the big magazines, because they tend to work often 6 months in advance, or in maybe early September, October, to some of the smaller magazines. But Christmas articles tend to be pitched for, as I say, during the summer. So if you're writing something that you've seen a TV show, or you've had something happen to you, think about, well, is it timely right now? Is this something that people will be interested in? Is it relevant for where I want to pitch it to? There's no point in pitching a piece to the Sun newspaper that is all about, something that's linked to your studies and academia, because the Sun won't publish it. Think about where you're going to pitch to and what their readership is. And this is something we'll be returning back to again and again during the course of this module, because it's really key, and it also feeds into that critical commentary. To be able to say, well, I've written something in this particular style because that is the style of the Times Higher Education Supplement, or that is the style of BuzzFeed because that's where I decided to pitch it to, or that's the style of the Huffington Post, or whatever. Be aware of where something would go, because when people say, well, this could appear anywhere, that means it's going to appear nowhere. This is exactly the same as people who say that they want to write a novel and their aimed readership for the novel is everyone. Again, if you say that it's something for everyone, that means it's actually for no one. Aim it at a particular audience. If you want to write for fellow students, and maybe you want to write something about getting through your degree whilst lockdown is happening. Although I would be careful about that type of article, because you need to be thinking about what you can bring to it that is something new, something that hasn't already been said, something that stands out. And you may have something, in which case, absolutely pitch it. But, where are you going to pitch it to? Where are you going to find that audience? What magazines, what online publications, what newspapers does that audience read? So, for example, if you've got an idea about how to care for oh, I know. What about if you've got an article that you'd like to write about how to get your cat to interact with you using speaker buttons? Now, recently, I have been getting into watching TikTok a lot, and one of my favourite types of TikToks are those where people's dogs and cats press on buttons on the floor. If you've not seen these, they are just amazing. So people's dogs particularly, but also some people have been doing it with their cats, they've trained them to use these different buttons, and the buttons all have words connected to them. So those of you who are linguistics students and have already done, have done the module about first language acquisition, you can maybe really get into this and write a really interesting piece about the differences between getting humans with, how children and babies acquire their first language, and how that works for animals, and how people are teaching their dogs and their cats to communicate with words. So as I say, there are some dogs that have got really large vocabularies and that they press on the different buttons. I've also seen a few TikToks where people have taught their cats too, and some of these are just lovely, and I would love to teach my cats to talk, but then I fear that once I taught them to talk, they'd never shut up, and that wouldn't be a good thing. So that's something that, I personally would find really interesting to read about, but where could that go? So it could be that that's the type of piece that would appear in something like the Huffington Post, BuzzFeed, Lad Bible. There are a number of different places that would be interested. Even something like, dare I say it, the Daily Mail. Or the Sun newspaper, so there are different places that you'd be able to put that type of piece out there. So think about who your audience is, think about what the audience is interested in, and what different publications they're reading. Is that piece relevant for them? Is it appropriate for them? Will it be interesting? And what can you do to make it engaging? What can you add to it? What is it that that other people don't? So this is where you've already done first language acquisition, so you have some knowledge, or maybe you've taught your dog or your cat you've trained them to interact with you in certain ways. So those are all the things that you need to be writing down, and this is something that we will do in the first seminar. We'll be writing down some of these ideas that you might have. So this is just absolutely sort of general free writing, and you might sort of spend 10 or 15 minutes just writing down particular ideas that you might have for an article. This, yes, it needs to be error free, but that's when you send it out as a pitch. To start with, you're just throwing around ideas. You need to start thinking about where it could go. Now, obviously, if this is for a piece that you are just pitching for Medium, part of that weekly pitch, and remember, the weekly pitch, if you've had a look on the Medium button on Moodle, you'll see that this is in addition to your weekly piece. So everybody gets to write a weekly piece, but in addition to that, there is an add-on where you can actually pitch to be on the featured page. And if you've had a good poke around on our Medium publication, you'll see that there are a couple of different tabs. So there is one that says Issue 2020, and that's where you can look at the magazine portfolios that people put together last year that were doing this module. And the other one is a featured piece, and it might be that there are a couple of pieces that I pick out from pitches that are sent to me. Now, you do not have to do that every week. You don't have to do it at all if you don't want to. You need to write a piece every week, but this is on top of that. So you could end up writing 2 pieces if you choose. Aside from that, If you're not doing that and you are thinking about pitching to a magazine or a newspaper or whatever, think about where it could go. And this is where you need to start widening the range of things that you read, and also thinking, well, I could write a piece for a children's magazine, or I could write a piece for, the Good Food magazine, or for their websites or whatever, related to something, you've had an idea about. So when you've decided where a piece could go, and remember you haven't written it yet, this is you just putting together your pitch, then you need to do some research. You need to go and Google that particular publication, and you're Googling it possibly to have a look at previous issues, if it's online, or if it appears in hard copy print and online. So you're doing this to find out more about it and to make sure that it's the right place for you to pitch to. Now, back in the times before, of course, you could go and actually have a look at physical copies in newsagents like WH Smith's, and it could be that you decide to sort of spend the money to actually buy a copy. I would recommend that you pitch to places that you already are familiar with, magazines, online publications, newspapers that you already read. That means that you will already have an idea of their house style, the sorts of pieces that they have in there, and because you're one of the readership, you know who the readership are and what sorts of things they like to read. Write something that you would like to read. But you also Google the publication to find out the details, like who the editor is. Is it a big publication, in which case there may be multiple different editors and sub-editors? There may be an editor who just deals with features, and that's what you're really pitching for, is a featured article. Now, feature articles, which we'll be looking at next week, are essentially everything that isn't news. So that means reviews, opinion pieces, interviews, sort of historical background pieces, absolutely everything and anything that is not news. So anything that appears in a magazine, unless it's a news magazine like Newsweek, it's going to be a feature article. And it's only really newspapers that have news and features. In most newspapers, the feature pieces are sort of further on into the middle of the newspaper. And this is where you might have an opinion piece or sort of a long form piece that maybe gives you all the background of a particular story and tells you more than just what's happened in the last 24 hours. But you need to go and Google and find out who it is that is responsible for receiving those pitches. Does that particular publication even accept unsolicited pitches? Do they work, do they have freelancers working for them? And for most magazines these days, the answer is yes. Partly because it's much cheaper to just pay a freelancer rather than employ a number of staff writers. And an awful lot of magazines actually run now on a real skeleton staff. So magazines like Kent Living and those sort of local magazines, you'll find that when you go and find out, when you Google them to find out who the editor is and who the staff are, they may only have 2 people actually writing for them, and all the extra pieces in there are actually written by freelancers, and sort of guest writers. So you find out who the editor is, you find out who it is that you need to pitch to, and then I absolutely recommend that you follow them and the publication on Twitter. This will also allow you to find out if the publication is actively looking for pieces on whatever subject. And an awful lot of features editors put those requests out regularly. There are also different Twitter feeds that will be things like journalism request, and some of them I already follow. So if you have a look at my Twitter, the list of people that I follow, you should see some of those. And they are really, really useful. And also the 2 videos that I've put on Moodle, they also talk about these as well. So that Twitter is absolutely your best friend in this. I would also have a look at LinkedIn. LinkedIn is a bit mixed. It used to be the place to look. I'm not sure that people use it as much now, but you can find out not only if the person that is down as the the editor or the features editor, you can double check to see if they're still doing that job. It could also be that if it's a particular publication that you would really like to work for, it could be that you can find on LinkedIn the person who has your ideal job, your dream job. And that could be, I don't know, maybe the features editor of The Economist. I don't know whether there is a features editor for it, or maybe the fashion director for Vogue magazine, for Vogue UK. Go and find them on LinkedIn. And the chances are that there's enough information on there that will allow you to maybe send them a message or to follow them on Twitter. And, when I say send them a message, if you find somebody that has your ideal job, do not be afraid of messaging them, emailing them, and asking them how they got where they are now and explaining your situation. Explain, I'm a final year student at the University of Kent. You have my dream job. How did you get there? And it could be that you can see a lot of that on LinkedIn already, but it could be that you want to know how they ended up where they are now. And if you ask in a polite way, most people will tell you, because it's something very flattering to have someone say, you've got my dream job. And if you can then sort of ask them politely, the chances are they will respond and they'll say, well, actually, once I graduated from this university, I went and did that, and they will often tell you the whole route. Once we're out of the pandemic, it could be that if you contact somebody like that, and follow them on Twitter and interact with them on Twitter, you might even be able to then say to them, could I possibly come and shadow you for the day? And again, a lot of people will be quite happy to do that. These are real people, and it's something different and unusual to have a student sort of saying, can you help me with this? Or, not asking them to do all the job or do all the work, but, to share their knowledge of how they got where they are. Don't be afraid to ask, what's the worst that can happen? The worst that can happen is they respond to you and say, here's how I did it. And that's not the worst thing at all. The worst thing is they could just ignore you, and you're no worse off than you are now. This is the same with sending a pitch as well to a really high profile newspaper or magazine. Do not be afraid to do it. The very worst that can happen, if you pitch to the Times newspaper, for example, or the Guardian or the Telegraph or wherever, the very worst that can happen is they come back to you and say, that's a great idea. Can you have that to us by Monday? Excuse me. That's the worst thing that can happen, because then it means you've got to write it. So, being ignored is not the worst thing. Every time you have a pitch that's ignored or doesn't succeed, you are one step closer to getting one that does get accepted. So, a lot of this is about tenacity. Keep on trying. And, I could tell you lots of different success stories of past students that have taken this module that have succeeded. And one place I would recommend that you pitch to is Independent Voices, which is part of the Independent newspaper, because one of the editors is a past student. So, pitch, you have nothing to lose. Excuse me. Okay, so once you've done that research, you write down your outlined idea. What is the big idea? Write down 3 things that your article could cover. So this is essentially what 3 different paragraphs would have in them. And we'll do this in the seminars. Write down the reasons that particular publication would want this piece. What is it about your idea that is ideal for their readership, because you are doing them a favour? Magazines need content. And yes, I'm aware that it's not the content that sells, it's actually the advertising space that sells. But they need readers to put those adverts in front of. And that's why readers will go to that particular publication. They want to find out more about, talking cats or whatever it is. And so you can provide that hook there. So write down the reasons that the publication would want this idea. Then write down why you're the right person to write the piece. Why is it you're the expert here? Have you done this? Did you take a module that covered this? Can you bring that into it? And this doesn't mean that you need to write down, I did a module last year all about this. You don't do that. Instead, you write down, you make it sound a lot better by saying something like, as part of my degree in English language and linguistics, I have studied how children acquire their first language, and this can be easily applied to how dogs and cats learn language. And as my article will show in the second paragraph or whatever. So, but make it really engaging. And I've sort of given that as an example, and that sounds maybe a bit too academic. Write it as if you're writing to a friend, but, a little bit more formal, but not much more. So when you've done all of that, you've got an outline, and that probably will be about 1 A4 side at this point. Go and do some more research. Has that particular publication that you're aiming this at, have they already had something similar printed? Because if they have, they're not going to want yours. It's as simple as that. They want something new and fresh. And likewise, when you're thinking about pitching, if you decide to do the weekly pitch and you want to pitch for the featured article on our publication, have a look. Has there already been a piece on writing in the media that covers this? In which case, we're not going to want it. Have something fresh, something new. Has any other magazine, newspaper or website published something similar recently? Has one of their competition magazines or websites, have they already had something like this? In which case, they're probably not going to want it. So some years ago, this happened to one of the students taking this module, probably about 5 years ago. The person that did this is now a primary school teacher, but she was doing this module, and she decided to pitch a piece to Cosmopolitan magazine. And it was ideal for Cosmopolitan. They really liked the idea. They emailed her almost directly back and said, this is a really great idea, but we had a piece on this last month or 2 months ago, and she hadn't checked. So although she was a regular reader of Cosmo, she hadn't actually caught that they had had something on this only recently. So rather than them just sending her away because they liked the idea, they did say, why don't you pitch it to, I think that they recommended going to Honey magazine. I'm not sure that Honey even exists anymore. Unfortunately, print magazines do fold, and even online magazines fold quite regularly. And certainly I was a staff writer for a magazine that had a huge amount of funding behind it, started with a really big bang, and then folded within 6 months. It's quite common. So, the freelancing world and the magazine world, it's a very fast turnaround in terms of, a lot of the jobs don't last. Anyway, this student sent it to the recommended magazine, and unfortunately they weren't interested because, of course, Cosmo had done it a couple of weeks before. Excuse me. So, do make sure that you've done that research to find out if somebody else has already had the piece or something similar. Now, before you send it off, check to see, has something more developed around that story? So, for example, if you decide that you want to write about politics, and something that's happening in the public eye at the moment, maybe there has been something more that has developed on this subject very recently. Make sure you include it, because then that shows that you are really engaged and you've done your research. So this will sort of add to that A4 page. It could now be maybe 2 pages, and that's if you're doing this handwritten. A lot of people like to do their pitches handwritten and then sort of write the full thing online or, straight onto a screen. If you can write direct onto a screen, do, because it saves you time. You're not having to do it twice. But equally, handwriting often will slow you down, and that can sometimes be a good thing for helping your thinking and thinking an idea through. So, I personally, I do both. Sometimes I start handwriting and then I start typing it up, and I will, or even I'll get like 2, 3 sentences into writing something long form handwritten, and then think, oh, for goodness sake, just write it all online. So whatever works for you, and do mix it up a bit. So when you've done all of that and you've got sort of like a rough draft of a pitch, you then need to write a mini biography. And this, the base of it will actually be the same for every pitch, but you'll tailor it for specific magazines. So you'll tell people who you are, and don't be afraid of saying that you're an undergrad at the University of Kent. Definitely write down what you normally write. Particularly, and this is where the tailoring comes in, if you are going to be pitching to a particular magazine, outlet, newspaper, website, you could already have, so say for instance you want to pitch to Rock Paper Shotgun, which is a gaming online publication. It could be that you already have written reviews, and they could be reviews of games. You might have a podcast, or you might have a YouTube channel where you already review games, in which case you tell them that, because that's relevant, and that's going to make you look, you'll be an expert in the area. You already know about this stuff, and it doesn't have to have been things that you have had published professionally. Anyone can start a podcast. Anyone can upload YouTube videos. Anyone can write articles for their own personal Medium account. So you might want to, you might already have a blog where you've already written lots of reviews, book reviews, games reviews, film reviews, anything like that. Tell them if it's relevant. And then that means that you can actually add links to what you've written previously. This is also why we do the weekly Medium articles, because then you have a digital footprint. You have a list of pieces that you have had published. And if they're appearing in Writing in the Media on Medium, they are being professionally published because you are not uploading them yourself, or rather you're not publishing them yourself. You're uploading them, and then one of your colleagues from that whoever's doing the editing that week, they will be reading them through, they'll be checking for errors, and they will be publishing them. That means you have publications. So this sort of pitching to a magazine, a newspaper, any online place might happen a couple of weeks down the line when you've got some pieces already out there on medium.com, and you can then also tell them how many reads it's had, especially if it's sort of quite impressive. Or it could be that you might want to say that you write for Writing in the Media, which is a publication based at the University of Kent, and it gets on average, and have a look and see what the current readership is for them. You might also want to say where you're currently based, and that could be that you are maybe working from home. Hopefully you are at the moment, and you're keeping safe there. But that may not be in the UK. So it could be that you want to write maybe a travel piece, and it could be that you want to write a travel piece from an expert's point of view of somebody who lives wherever it is. And that could be that maybe you live in central London, or even on the outskirts of London, but London really well, or Canterbury, or wherever in the world you are located. Again, if this is relevant, include it. Because having a piece written by somebody who lives in Hong Kong telling you where the best places are to visit Hong Kong when the pandemic has gone and we can travel again, that would be a really interesting piece for maybe Wanderlust magazine or whoever. And then add why you want to write for them. So this is where you can actually prove that you've read their publication, and you may want to flatter the editor a bit, and it could be that they've had something in there last month, or maybe 6 months ago, that you read and you really liked, Or maybe it happened, something that came out last week that you really liked, and maybe your piece is a follow-up to something that they had. So tell them that. It could be that you say, I've been reading your publication for the last 5 years or whatever, and it's one of the reasons why I want to go into journalism or work for the media. I read that piece that you did on X, and I thought it was really good, and I really sort of admire the way you write, or whatever. Again, people like a little bit of flattery. Don't go over the top with it, but absolutely tell them why you want to write for them in particular. What is it that you can bring to them? Now, that adding the extra is absolutely when you can say, well, the reason why I'm the right person to write this is because not only do I love reading about cats and dogs, but, I've done this course, I'm doing this degree, and part of my degree, I learned about first language acquisition. And I actually know how you can teach your cat and your dog, and I've done it too. So that's why you should have me writing this piece for you, except you're not going to sort of write, and that's why you should have me write, you're going to put it in a more palatable form, shall we say. But essentially, you're going to be selling your idea and why you're the person that's best to write it. So when you've done all of that, your pitch is nearly ready to go. And at the moment, it might still be really quite long. It might still be, I don't know, it could be 500, 600 words, and it's got all of the research in and all of the extra stuff. Before you send it off, you need to go and check your online credentials. This is where, and this I would recommend for all of you for the future, for before you apply for jobs as well, go and check what is out there under your name. So this is where you need to double check that your Facebook account and any of your other public accounts are showing what you are happy to show to the world. So particularly Facebook and Instagram and maybe TikTok and so on. Those ones that are very much likely to be open and full of things that you did maybe when you were younger, or sort of things that are maybe a little bit embarrassing that you don't want future employers to see. Go and check them now. Go and clear all of that up. Do a Google search under your name. And this is where, if you've come across the book by Jon Ronson, which is called, I've forgotten what it's called now. It's not called Who Do You Think You Are, but it's called something like that. We will actually be looking at this later on in the term. So Jon Ronson wrote a book, I think it's called You Think You've Been Shamed, or You've Been Publicly Shamed, something like that. And he talks about real examples of So You've Been Publicly Shamed, I think it's called. But he talks about real examples of people who didn't have their social media locked down and they were absolutely publicly shamed, lost their jobs and so on. And he explains how you can avoid that. So, do a Google search on yourself. There are ways, if you've got something that comes up as the first thing under your name that isn't you, or so especially if you've got quite a common name, or it is you and it's something that you really don't want out there. The problem is Google has everything forever. So what you need to do is to put extra things that do show the version of you that you want to have for public consumption. We'll look at this in some more depth in the coming weeks, particularly when we look at branding and how that works. But essentially, you need to get good stuff out there that fits in with the version of you that you want to have on public display. So that means putting things maybe on Twitter, on Instagram, on LinkedIn if you're using it, and on all those other various different platforms that are positive, so that when somebody searches for your name, you come up top with the version that you want to have out there. So absolutely tailor your online credentials. If you are going to keep, say, a private Facebook account, keep it very locked down. Make sure that the posts are only available to your friends, not friends of friends, and so on. And with Twitter, if you haven't yet got a Twitter account, get one, but make sure that you keep it public. So this is the flip side. After telling you, yeah, lock down your Facebook account, lock down your Instagram or whatever, with Twitter, you want to have the opposite. You want to have it not locked. If you have a Twitter account that's locked, it's pretty pointless. Twitter is not like other forms of social media. With Twitter, you need to be aware that it's a bit like standing on a street corner and shouting, whereas Facebook is like being down the pub with your mates, when we could do that, or in a cafe with your mates. And so that means that you are talking generally to the people sitting around the table with you, your friends, but other people may be able to overhear. That's when you make sure that posts are only available just to friends, or maybe friends of friends, depends on how careful you want to be, but only put things out there that you are happy to be shared in public. If you are happy to say something in public, in the real world, then put them out there. But this is what we've seen recently with users of Parler in America, and of course Parler has now been closed down. But people were putting selfies and videos of themselves storming the Capitol, as we saw a few weeks ago, and of course all of that information has been passed to the FBI, and people are getting arrested. That was really stupid of them, aside from the illegality of storming the Capitol and how terrible that is. Aside from that, it's really stupid to put pictures of yourself or videos of yourself committing a crime and then sort of saying, oh look, here I am committing a crime. Don't do it. And that includes things like, if you've got photos, as we all have, of when you've been out with your friends and maybe you've had one too many drinks, or you've got yourself into a compromising situation. If there is photographic evidence, you want to make sure that that is not available for the public. Twitter is very much a shop front, and you want to put things out there that absolutely put you in the best light. So, use that productively, and that does need to be public, because if you have it all locked down, nobody can follow you, and it's pretty pointless. And if you want to work in the media, you need to have a Twitter account, because that's where the jobs are, that's where the new information comes, and that's where you can share your work. So yes, tailor your online credentials, but we will come back to this. We will be looking at social media again. Finally, when you've done all of that, you need to start putting that pitch together. So you've got all of that information, you've got the research that you've done, you've got the outlined idea. Now you need to start absolutely putting it together in the same way that you would. This is a bit like writing an essay. You go and do the reading, you go and watch the relevant videos, you put all of this stuff, all of your notes together, and you start to work out what should be in there and what shouldn't. So, you need to keep it quite tight, and, you need to keep it sort of very much on the nose of what it is that you are sending. Pitches shouldn't be more than about 300 words long. It should be the case that the editor can read the entire pitch in a single screen. They don't have to scroll down. So you need to get to the point. When you've managed to get your pitch down to 300 words or less, ideally less, you need to edit. Take out unnecessary words. The Hemingway app is quite useful for that, but you need to keep on editing, editing, and editing. Check the sentence order. Does it make logical sense? Check the grammar, the punctuation, the paragraphs, the spelling. Because if an editor gets a pitch that has got grammatical errors in it, punctuation errors in it, spelling errors in it, they're not going to accept your pitch. It's just going to be deleted straight away. Because why would an editor take on somebody who can't even get the pitch right? It's tough. So don't rule yourself out at the first stage. And if you're somebody who is perhaps not the world's greatest speller, and there's a lot of us like that, then make sure that you run the spell check. Get somebody else to read it. Likewise with the grammar and the punctuation and so on. There is nothing wrong with, having problems with that. There are an awful lot of people out there who are incredibly creative and incredibly successful who have sort of specific problems like dyslexia. That does not mean that you cannot do this. Just means that you need to sort of work in sort of extra checks for yourself, and that could be that you ask somebody else to read over what you've written. Does that particular pitch look reasonable? And this is another reason why we're doing this. There is the possibility of having a weekly pitch to me, because on the one hand, yes, I'm going to read it more like an editor, but equally, if there are problems with it, I can come back to you and I can say, you need to double check on your spellings, or you need to get this proofread. So it's those sorts of things. It's about helping you and putting that support in place, because there are plenty of writers, excellent writers out there who have dyslexia, and that is not a reason to actually stop you at all. So make sure though that you have these things in place to help you. If you want to use something like Grammarly, by all means do. I personally have never used it, so I can't sort of recommend it as a user as such, but I hear it's very good. Certainly use a spell checker. I personally like the Hemingway app, because that takes out unnecessary words, tells you where things are a bit too overblown. Word will also do some of this for you and tell you where you've got errors, grammatical errors. Sometimes Word gets it wrong, but use any of those tools that are out there. Read it aloud to someone. Often reading it aloud, because it's a different process for your brain, that will often help you to pick up where you've got errors or gaps. And then finally, check the email address. And remember, you need to address it to the person that you're sending it to. So that means you do not start with dear sir or dear madam or to whom it may concern. Do not start an email like that if you're pitching for an article, because an editor will delete it straight away. Write it to the editor. And I don't mean dear editor. Find out their name. So this is the same as when you're emailing. If you decide you want to email me for the pitch for this week, and all of that is on Medium, or not Medium, it's on Moodle. If you want to try this week's pitch, then you need to email me and you need to address it to me. So, address it Dear Heidi, or Hi Heidi, or Hello Heidi, any of those work. So, do that. Actually find out who the person is, send it to them. Because none of us likes getting emails. I'm sure you don't like it when you get an email from the university that just says dear student, because you know that it's just gone out to everybody, and there might be stuff in there that's interesting, but it's not tailored specifically to you. So do the same thing. Check the email address and then finally send it off. What happens then? Well, you can see here on this slide, on the left-hand side, that's actually a spreadsheet, and it's quite an old spreadsheet from 2009. This is back when I was putting out a lot of poetry, and I've had a few pieces of poetry published, but I was really sort of trying to get a lot of poetry out there. And what I did was I kept track of who I had sent poems to, and poetry works slightly differently from sending off a pitch to a magazine, in as much that if you want to send poetry to literary journals that accept poetry, they tend to ask for between 6 and 8 poems. They'll probably only publish one of them, but they ask for a selection. And so I sent out a number to various different places. I kept track of where the place was, and all of those ones that are in blue, they've got their direct links to the magazine, that poetry journal. And you can see, for example, I sent 6 pieces to Acumen, and I sent them in July 2009. And the reason why they're in different sort of, they're not all together, is because these are linked to the left-hand side that you can't see, which has got a list of the poems. And you can see that along that row, One particular poem that went to Acumen in July 2009 also went to Angelic Dynamo in March 2009, and also a Bache journal in 2009. Now, the two that went in March didn't go out simultaneously. Do not send simultaneous submissions, whether it's poetry, short stories, or sending pitches. Do not send the same pitch or the same poems or the same short stories to the same two different magazines at the same time. Just don't. It's a bit like asking two people out on the same day, to go to the same thing. Don't do it. Instead, what you do is you send things off to one place at a time. So I had sent a number of poems. You can see I sent 3 poems to Abache in March, and they got back to me very quickly and said they didn't want them, which is why they're in red. I do have another spreadsheet that's part of this, another sheet in it that actually has green where things got published. But when it didn't get accepted, I then sent it straight out to Angelic Dynamo, and it didn't get published there either. So I sent it out again in July to Acumen, and they didn't accept it either. So eventually, I don't know which poem it was, whether it did finally get published or not, I don't know. I could go back and have a look at the original spreadsheet, and I've got another page of spreadsheets where things got accepted. So I did sort of keep track of everything. So you might want to do that if you're sending out lots and lots of pitches. But essentially, when you've sent a pitch to someone, you should wait around about a week. If you don't hear from them in a week, email them again. And it could be that you just send an email saying, hi, just checking that you've had a chance to read my pitch. And if you don't hear anything again after a second email, just accept they're not interested and they're just not bothering to get back to you, which is rude, but that sometimes happens with busy editors. Cut your losses, move on, send the pitch somewhere else. But don't let a pitch sit around for more than 2 weeks. And if it's something that's really time sensitive, it might be even less than that. But redraft the pitch for somewhere else, send it off to somewhere else. And the way to avoid falling into the sort of the pit of despair and constantly watching your emails is to send out multiple different pitches to different magazines. So that means that you've got more than one story on the go. And you might have, if you're working as a freelance and you want to actually make money out of it, you need to be sending out a pitch every single day of the week, at least one. So that means that you've got 5 stories that you're thinking about writing. And remember, the pitch isn't the whole article. It's just an outline. It's an idea. It's got 3 main points to it, and reasons why this will be interesting. So it's not going to be more than 300 words. It's probably going to be less than that. So you send out 5 different ideas. Not all of them will get picked up. And it could be that the first 5 you send out, none of them get picked up. Keep going. Send out new ideas. Send out new pitches. And what will happen eventually is that one of them will get accepted. You just have to keep going. Sometimes your first pitch will get accepted, and that is amazing and scary. But send them out. And it may be that for an awful lot of you, you decide that you're not going to send out any pitches until you've done a dry run with sending pitches to me. And you do that extra add-on. Do it. We'll make it as professional, as we possibly can, so that you get a real idea of how that feels. So that means if you're taking part in that additional add-on of sending out a pitch each week, first of all, remember you don't have to do it. You don't have to do it every week either. And also that you can guarantee you will not get your pitch accepted. If you do send it out every week, you won't get accepted every week. So I will only choose 1 or 2 each week. There are 31 or 32 of you taking this module. So there is the opportunity for all of you to have a piece accepted, but because I could choose, we've got 10 weeks, I could choose 3 pieces each week, but I know that there will be some of you that won't take part in that. And that's okay. You don't have to feel that you have to. And equally, there could be some of you that actually get really good at doing this, and I end up accepting 2 of your pitches or 3 of your pitches. So it's absolutely sort of competitive, but that is just for the pitch. The articles that you write every week, those are not competitive. You put them up, you submit them to Writing in the Media, they'll get edited, they will go online. It's in that section that is the featured piece. That's competitive, and you don't have to take part in that if you don't want to. Entirely up to you. Okay, so I have waffled on now for quite a long time. We will recap on some of this in the seminars. So I will see you then.